Not sure where to begin with this. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for at first. It took some digging, but this post was forwarded around enough that it got my attention. I recognized the story, the writing style, and how you speak about the forest. I found your post, Ethan. I have all of you to thank here, actually. We recovered Ethan's phone at the scene, screen cracked but still working. I'd been waiting for the warrant to take its sweet time to come through when the notifications kept pinging on the lock screen. I checked into the logo where the messages were coming from, and I found this site. I'm not really on social media at all, but made my own account anyway so I can keep tabs on here. He'd been missing for 36 hours when I found the post. I've read it about 10 times before I finally accepted it for what it is. Not a piece of creative writing, but a record. Some comments here claim this is a joke, or some hoax. I wish that were true. If you're reading this and you've already read his entry, then you understand why I'm adding to it. If he's alive, this might be the only place I can reach him. And if he isn't, then I will make sure it wasn't for nothing. I went back to the campsite this morning. It had already been logged, photographed, cleared of the obvious. That didn't mean it was finished. It just meant no one else thought there was more to see. Ethan was careful. I knew that before ever laying eyes on the scene. He didn't leave trash behind. He didn't lose gear. He set up carefully with purpose. What I found didn't match that. The fire pit had been kicked apart, not in an attempt to snuff out warm coals, like someone kicked into it hard and fast without caring where their foot landed. The half-burnt logs lay scattered out from the side of the broken ring of stones. His tent was the same. The poles had been broken, the fabric folded in on itself, like it had collapsed under a heavy weight. No gashes or large tears. There was one thing that stuck out. A single spent casing, half buried under some leaves mere feet from the fire ring. I recognized the caliber immediately. So did the lab. A single .30 caliber shell. Typical for big game. However, there was no impact site found. That was what bothered me. No tree strike, no ground penetration, no ricochets. I double-checked anyway. My partner, Paul Reddick, had been transferred to me 2 months ago. Narcotics, then violent crimes. Good clearance rate, good instincts, as long as the problem looked like something he'd seen before. He came to inspect the scene with me and see for himself just what these cases are like out here. Could have panicked, Paul said behind me. He hadn't crouched. He was still standing near the tent, hands on his belt, eyes scanning for shapes instead of details. Fired once, missed, took off. He nudged the tent with his shoe, fell into his tent on the way out. I didn't respond. I was tracing the casing's position relative to the fire pit, the tent, the disturbed ground. People do weird things under stress, he added. That was the problem. Ethan didn't. If he'd fired at a person, it would have been closer to the tent. If he'd fired at an animal, there would have been damage, hit or miss. Even a warning shot leaves a trace. The casing told me when the shot was fired. The fire pit told me how the camp was disrupted. The tent told me how fast it happened. All signs pointed to a struggle. None of it told me where the bullet went. Look, he said, finally crouching beside me. No blood, no drag marks, no signs of a fight. Odds are he spooked himself and wandered off injured. Wandered where? I asked. He gestured vaguely into the trees. That's not how people disappear, I said. That's exactly how they disappear, he replied. We've both worked enough missing cases. He stood back up. There's been how many folks gone missing just in this state alone? Too many, but this is different, I said a bit sharper than intended. How's that? What's different here, Wolf? I stood up and stepped slowly over to the fire pit. First the tent. He fell into it, but not running away. Staggered backwards. He was caught off guard. Got back up and fought back. It's a rough fight, hence the destroyed fire pit. They didn't care about smashing into some flames and hot embers, so the stakes were high. He manages to get a shot off with his rifle, but no trace of the bullet. Either it sailed to the next county or found its mark. Paul follows along as I gesture back and forth, walking him through it. Okay, a shot like that would be serious, but we haven't seen anybody turn up with burns or a rifle wound at any of the emergency rooms. So where did they go? Where's the blood? I vaguely gesture to the tree line. I don't know. That's what bothers me. We made the trip back to the car and decided to head back to the station after grabbing some coffee. I mulled over the details with each sip of the corner store's finest. Paul was right about one thing. There have been too many disappearances out here. It seems like with each subsequent case, there's less and less to go on. Maybe the connections aren't in what's left behind, but rather what we don't see. We have more evidence this time, just can't quite connect the dots yet. We sat back to back at our shared space in the office, papers and old reports spread between us on the desk. We were each going through my recent missing cases on our respective desktops. We were looking for anything that seemed like a similarity between them, and when we thought we found something that lined up, would take the corresponding paper and tag it to our board. I sat my brown paper coffee cup next to the chipped ceramic mug on my desk, both empty. I'd had 3 individual cases like this in the past 4 years, now a 4th. When you're a detective, you get a lot of calls for all sorts of situations. Not all are murders and heinous crimes, yet somehow they each come with their own mountain of paperwork. It's easy to lose sight of the gravity of certain details in the ritualistic cataloging and record keeping. Thankfully, I'm very thorough. One of the girls in the tech lab, Gabriella, likes to joke whenever I bring in evidence, like hairs, Q-tip swabs, or one time it was literally a pile of dirt. She would laugh, add it into evidence for analysis, and say, "The wolf is on the hunt." The trails ran cold on all of these. I pinned up the last page to the board, a missing hiker named Carrie. Her photo alongside Ethan with his dad, a lost camper, and a missing hunter, all stared back at me as I stared into their still faces, frozen in time. As Paul said, a lot of people go missing in the forests and hills. Diligence pays off, however. Most of those cases ended with a body found, some of them alive, those we celebrated. These few that went nowhere gave me a dull ache in the back of my mind. Too little evidence, and total disappearance with what remained offering barely a whisper. Just like Ethan and his father. All dead ends, huh? Yeah, I replied. Those are the worst. We had some like that in violent crimes. The clock is ticking. You get your hopes up, and then you run right into a wall. He sipped the last of his coffee, sometimes literally. He said that as if the words hurt. Paul got transferred over to our precinct for wrecking his police vehicle into a wall chasing after fleeing suspect. Twice. I guess they figured some time away from the wheel and out on the trails would slow him down a bit. He had a passion for the work, sure, just reckless. Paul leaned back in his chair, eyes still on the board. You ever think maybe you're too close to this one? I didn't answer right away. I mean, he added softer now, you worked his dad's case. You knew the kid, that kind of thing. It can bend how you see the facts. He finally looked at me then, like he was waiting for some acknowledgement. Or it can sharpen them, I said. Paul held up a hand. I'm not saying you're wrong, just saying you might be looking for something that's not really there. I turned back to the board. Ethan's photo stared back at me, same as before. That's exactly what I'm doing. We've seen what was left behind already. I gestured to the board. What aren't we seeing? He raised an eyebrow. If this was any other missing hiker, Paul continued, turning back to his monitor, we'd already be filing it under exposure or misadventure. The only thing that's not there is the kid. That one landed. Not because he was accusing me, but because from the department's point of view, he wasn't wrong. I must have made a face without realizing it because his expression dropped quickly. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be insensitive, I just don't see. No, you don't see. I interrupted him. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the strain from Paul's irritating line of thinking and the fluorescent lights of the stale office space. I let out a frustrated sigh. Look, I'm going to get some lunch. You want anything? No, I'm good. Thanks, Paul said in a more muted tone. Before I exited the room, I turned back to him. Get in touch with Gabs later. See if they got anything off of the cell phone. Then I left. I grabbed a quick drive-through sandwich and left Paul a text. Going to go check on something. We'll keep you posted. The drive didn't take long. I soon found myself standing at the door to Ethan's apartment. I must have stared at the doorknob for an age before opening it. Deep down, Paul wasn't wrong. Ethan isn't just another victim. I knew him. Maybe that does cloud my judgment. Maybe I'm just grasping at the wind here. I walked in past the kitchen and stared at the oak dining table. We usually met up at the old diner across town over a piece of Miss May's apple pie, but he did invite me over once. The table sat lonely and empty. The fridge hummed away behind me. The apartment looked the same as it had then, clean but lived in. The muffled noise of a passing car and a ticking clock was the only noises left here. I moved through the rooms, slowly. Nothing obvious missing. Nothing obviously out of place. We had no idea what he took with him that day, so it was impossible to know for sure something more was unaccounted for. My last stop was the bedroom. A county map covered most of the wall above his desk, not decorative, not framed, pinned and marked with red ink. The map both intrigued me and annoyed me. Whoever cataloged the apartment had almost done a decent job. Almost. Why wasn't there a photo of this map in evidence? I stepped closer. The first pin sat just left of center. The old quarry. I knew that spot. That was the missing camper. Another pin northward. The mountain pass. Then his father's campsite. My stomach tightened as the recognition sunk in. These weren't hiking or hunting spots. They were investigations. The cases I couldn't close. I pressed one with my finger. The eastern trailhead, Carrie's last location. All we ever found was her left shoe, pointed downwind like she'd simply stepped out of it. When we discussed my old cases in the past, it was with the intent to give him a process of how I worked through the problem. I didn't think he was actually looking for something in them. The pins weren't evenly spaced. They weren't forming a route or a search grid. They didn't make sense other than a checklist. Actually, there was a check mark by one and a question mark by another. There were more pins with small symbols, but I had no more reference for what they could mean. I leaned back, studying the wall, when I noticed something else. A sliver of yellow paper stuck out at the bottom corner. A sticky note tucked behind the map's corner. Written on it were the words, quiet, pressure change, echoes. That explained some of the symbols I saw. There was a few Q's, a PC, and an E crossed out. It didn't make sense. The last thing I remember from him was where he found the watch and the knife. Those objects' locations didn't align with anything on this map, and the information they held, while strange, didn't connect, but spread the puzzle further apart. I stood there in the silence, waiting for some neuron in my brain to start connecting like an old Morse code machine, when it suddenly clicked. He wasn't looking for something tangible, he was looking for conditions. My phone startled me. It was Paul. Hello? Hey. He paused on the line. Look, I'm sorry for being an ass earlier. I was rude about you being close to the case. I know you're a good detective. Gabs assured me of that. You find leads where other guys don't, and you don't give up without chasing them to the end. I think that's what really makes a difference in this job. I was surprised, pleasantly so. Maybe he was starting to soften his ridged edges. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you saying that. Anyway, there's something we need to chase down. Gab said her team finished analyzing Ethan's phone. It was hard to find, but there has been surveillance software running in the background with a long time stamp on it. Somebody was watching him, Derek. We have a trace to an IP in town. Let's knock and see who answers. I was floored. Why would anyone be surveying an ordinary civilian? Absolutely. Just hang tight. I'll be there in 15. This just got stranger. This could easily go south, and I'm not ready to turn this over to the feds. I will update when we have some answers. Right now, there's too many holes in this puzzle. Too many breadcrumbs with no trail. Whoever took Ethan might still be out there, watching. But so am I, and I will hunt this down.